So now we're down to the most important part of the video, the part where I explain how I build my tapers and what kind of material I'm using. And basically for the butt section of the leader, I'm using 20-pound chameleon, so it's Maxima 20-pound chameleon. And what that does is it has a lot less memory, and I actually like the color of it. I like the color because I'll show you in the next step. I want my clients to be able to see from their fly line to the leader. I want them to be able to see that junction. I don't want it to just be clear, because I want them to be able to see how the currents are playing on that part of the leader, as opposed to when it's clear, you do a mend and you think that that's all you have to do. You don't know whether the mend is big enough or not. So when you can see the line, you can see the way the current plays on the line, it works a lot better. And then I'm dropping down to 15-pound amnesia. Again, same thing, super bright colors. So I'm going to have that brown against the green, and you're going to be able to tell it's kind of like a cider if you're fishing Euro rigs. So, and from that initial leader section that I build with the amnesia and the chameleon, I'll run about a couple of feet of 8-pound Maxima Ultra Green. So this is more clear. This is the business end of the line where it's supposed to be clear, where you don't want to spook the fish. So I'll run a couple of feet of this onto a barrel swivel, and then I will run from the barrel swivel down and just be straight tippet. And the barrel swivels are going to be VMC. They're really particular. I've tried out a couple of different kinds. My buddy Brian up in Colorado turned me on to these. They've been money since. So these are the items that you're going to need when you build your leader. We're going to have the chameleon, the line, the amnesia, also these barrel swivels. They're VMC. It does make a difference on which ones you use. You don't want to just use the cheap ones from Cabela's or Bass Pro Shops. Get some good barrel swivels. This is a size 12. I like the smaller ones. And then you're going to need some good pair of Hemos, of course. Something to cut the line. The lid rig works really well for this heavy stuff. And then the tippet rings that I use are Hannock. They're 2 mil tippet rings. Hannock is a company from overseas. They make really good stuff. They're the only tippet ring that I found that doesn't cut 6x or 6.5x tippet, since I fish in tailwater and fish that small stuff all the time. So basically you're going to run about 1.5 to 2 feet of the 20-pound chameleon. The Maxima chameleon is great stuff. It doesn't have a lot of memory in it. You can take it off the spool and it is relatively straight once you straighten it. After that, I'm going to run about 2 feet of amnesia. This is 15-pound in the green color. I really like the green and the brown chameleon because of that contrast together. So what happens is my clients can see the leader that's coming off of their fly line, and they can see the microcurrents and how the microcurrents mess with the leader, and they're able to detect which way to mend. Sometimes this can act like a cider. It can give you another perception of when a fish is taking a fly. Even when you're fishing dries, you can sort of follow this leader down if you can't see that tiny, tiny dry. So for that reason, and a lot of other reasons, I like using the chameleon to the amnesia. Amnesia is great, great stuff. It even has less memory than chameleon. Once you straighten it out at the beginning of the day, you shouldn't have any problems. Then I'm going to blood knot about 3 feet of the Maxima Ultra Green, 8-pound or 6-pound. This is what starts the actual leader material, the material that you can sink down into the water, the material that gets closer to the flies and the split shot, so that you don't want the fish to be able to see. And then of course, after that, I'm going to run a barrel swivel. That's kind of the hinge point on all of this 90-degree nymphing. Going to put a barrel swivel on the end of the Maxima Ultra Green, and then run your tippet from there, depending on how deep you want to fish and what size tippet you're going to fish. I'm usually running about 5x tippet because I fish on the San Juan, where we fish size 20 to 26 midges all the time. So 5x, 6x tippet are what we use mostly, and I'm running about 3.5 feet of that 5x tippet from the barrel swivel down to a tippet ring. And then once I use the tippet ring, I'm going to 5.5x or 6x tippet down from the tippet ring, and then of course your first fly and second fly. So It's going to seem like a lot of stuff to do, but what you can do is tie them up, you know, when you have a lot of, at home, when you have a lot of light, you have a lot of patience. And I tie these up, I pre-tie these, and you can see that they are labeled for shallow nymphing, if I'm going to go shallow. And then I have a deep rig, so if I'm going to go between like 10 and 15 feet, I have leaders that I built specifically for deep parts of the river or lake. And I'll show you my favorite taper. So this is the one that you're probably going to want to build for yourselves. I have one that's longer with the chameleon and the amnesia for a boat because I guide out of a boat a lot. And sometimes we're fishing 9 feet deep, 10, 11 feet deep. So I'm fishing a longer rig. But when you're wading, you're not going to be needing that long of a leader. So what I do is I go 2 feet of amnesia. So we've got 2 feet of the amnesia. Super nice. You can see it. It's easier to transfer the energy. And then it's not going to maintain those coils. You don't have to stretch it out as much. Then I have a blood knot to the ultra green, and that's 8 pound. So I've got about 2 feet of the 8 pound ultra green in the maxima, and then down to the strike indicator. Here's the key. So this is the hinge 90 degree kind of nymphing setup that you're going to have. So we've got this thingamabobber strike indicator, and then we have the barrel swivel. So what the barrel swivel is going to allow it to do is to just go more at a 90 degree, just straight down from the indicator. On a regular leader, when you set this up, you put your indicator, it's more like this. I mean, if you're lucky, it's like this. But what we really want to do is we want to have that indicator here, and we want to have our rig just straight down, cut through the water with this thin piece of tippet. So from the barrel swivel, I have 3 feet of 5X tippet down to a tippet ring. And not all tippet rings are created equal. Most of them are actually not very good. I think that they get away with it because we're fishing 3X, 2X, 4X most of the time around the country. When you fish 5, 6X, 6.5X, if you don't have good tippet rings, these actually have burrs in them, a lot of them from the factory. And when you go to tighten your knot, it'll actually cut the tippet. It took me a long time to find good tippet rings. Finally found some from Hannock. This is a company from overseas. They do a lot of good fly tying stuff, some good hooks. And they happen to have these micro rings in 2 mil that are really, really good. Perfect for what I do. So I'm going to run the barrel swivel down about 3 feet of 5X tippet to the tippet ring. And then I'm going to run 6X tippet. In this case, the water on the San Juan is super clear and the fish are spooky. So I've got about and you want to say about more than a foot, like 15 inches from your tippet ring to your first fly. And the reason for that is you're going to be chewing up this tippet section as you change flies out, so you don't want it to get too short. We're going to have the weights or split shot right here at the tippet ring. You don't want the weights or the split shot to be that close to the first fly, because what happens is the weights are drifting at a different rate than a tiny little fly, especially if you're using, we use 22, 24, 26s. So this weight is going to affect the way that first fly drifts. So I want the weight to be as far away from the first and second fly as possible. So if there is a disadvantage for all of the advantages of a hinge or a 90 degree nymphing system, and I think there are many, if there's one disadvantage, it's that once you set up your 90 degree rig, so once you set up your indicator and your depth of tippet, you're pretty much set at that depth. So if you're, in this case, I have almost 3 feet of tippet, that's going to do most of what I want it to do. But what happens if I'm running in the boat and I need to fish deeper? The most common thing I do to get people into fish is to change their depth and their weight, not to change flies. So that's the reason why I built this special leader with the 8 pound. So what I've done is I can make this hinge rig. I can put my strike indicator on the amnesia section. So this is going to be, the indicator is going to be closer to my fly line now. And this is how you would fish if you're going to fish deep, in the Texas hole, some kind of deep, slow water, something where you need to get down deep real fast. So this is going to be my hinge point here. And then this 8 pound and the barrel swivel and the tippet are going to be as deep as I can fish. And I have a long wingspan and it's past that. So it's going to be 5.5 feet or so. So I can fish 5.5, 6 feet easily with this rig, and I can even move it up to Amnesia if I need to, so it's right by my fly line. But a lot of times you're not going to be fishing as deep as that. And the good thing about the hinge rig or the 90-degree rig is the tippet is so fine that if you're fishing 5 feet of water, you can literally use 5 feet from your indicator to the fly. So if you think back to when you learned how to nymph, everyone says, they ask you, where do I put my strike indicator depending on how deep the water is? And the common answer used to be 1.5 times the depth of the water. So if you're fishing a hole that's 2 feet deep, you want to put your strike indicator about 3 feet from the weights. So you're fishing actually deeper than the weight, deeper than the section of water that you're fishing. And the reason for that is because they knew that you can't get a 90-degree drift with a regular leader. What's happening is you have to compensate for that drift. You have to compensate for that angle drift by putting your indicator 1.5 times the depth of the water, because they knew that you're not going to be drifting like this with a regular leader. You're going to be drifting more like this. So you have to compensate for the fact that the thicker part of your leader isn't going to sink as fast. When you have this hinge rig or this 90-degree nymphing system, wherever you put the indicator and the length of tippet that you have is how much you're going to fish, how deep you're going to fish on the bottom. So if the same run is 2 feet deep, your indicator is only going to be 2 feet from your weight. If the run is 5 feet deep, instead of having to be like 7.5 feet deep on your rig, you're literally just 5 feet from your indicator down to your tippet section, down to your 2 flies. So it simplifies things a lot better. You can tell where the depths are that you're fishing. So you're going to use the blood knot to tie the butt section of the leaders together. But once you get down to the tippet section, when you're on the 8-pound Maxima Ultra Green, to the tippet, you're going to use the barrel swivel. So what knot do you use to tie the barrel swivel on? And what knot I use is the double Davy knot or a Pitson knot. I know there are going to be people who in the comments are going to say, oh, I've used a clinch knot, an improved clinch knot for the past 50 years and it's never failed me, yada, yada, yada. There are a ton of knots out there that are way stronger than the clinch knot. Just ask the bass guys when they use the polymer knot or the trilene knot. A lot better knots out there than the clinch knot. And the Davy knot is probably the best. The Pitson or 1620 is the second best. So that's the knot that I'm using to tie on the barrel swivel. Yeah, it's easier with this thick tippet, but the Davy knot, another thing I like about the Davy knot or the double Davy knot is that it is really small, especially when you're using small flies, size 24 flies, 6X tippet. If you do a 6-turn clinch knot, which is what you should be doing with these small flies, the knot ends up being as big as the fly, so it's super important. Another big advantage of the Davy knot is that its profile is small. Once you tie it, it's not going to slip anywhere. I've used this knot in 6.5X, 7X tippet for a long time and I've never had it slip out. Super, super strong knot. The Davy knot or the double Davy knot.